Okay.
I now call to order the 396th regular meeting of the City of College Place Planning Commission. Will the clerk take roll call, please?
Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Commissioner Brenes Moriora,
Here.
Commissioner Roth,
Here.
Commissioner Lauterbach,
Here.
Commissioner Reiswig,
Here.
Commissioner Huyman is excused, and Commissioner Davis is absent. Also present is John Record, Community Development Director, Claudia Estrada, the Community Development Administrative Assistant, and Greg Dorn with GR Dorn and Associates. And then myself.
Well, it's nice to have you. So next, we're going to ask for if there's any public comments that were submitted. Any, do we have any public comments that have been submitted lately?
This is John Rickard. We have not received any public comments.
All righty. In that case, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. And that will consist of approval agenda for July 21st, 2020, and approve commission minutes for June 16th, 2020. Has everybody looked in that? Can somebody make a motion, please?
So moved.
How about a second?
Second.
Do we have any discussions on either one of these agendas? If no discussions, then all of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, so that's passed. The ayes have it, and the motion is passed. All right, we're going to move on to our regular agenda item then. Item number 1. We're going to talk about commercial hemp production. Mr. Dorn and Mr. Rickard are going to present this. Thank you, gentlemen, both. I appreciate it.
Well, I'll just turn it over to Mr. Dorn.
Okay.
Greg, go ahead.
Yep. At the last meeting, we discussed the state licensing of commercial hemp, some of the enforcement issues that the city encountered with a state licensed producer last growing season, and some of the options that the city might have available to it. And at your direction, we have modified a line item in the city's development regulations in the table of permitted uses, and that's in your packet. And so as you can see, as it is written, it would specifically prohibit state licensed hemp production in all zoning districts in the city, so that the growing of hemp would be treated consistent with how the growing of marijuana is treated in the city, which is, it is prohibited. So unless you have any follow-up questions or comments, or wanted to discuss, further discuss alternatives to this approach, this would just be incorporated into the table of permitted uses. And when we take the package of recommendations forward, that would then be in the document as it's distributed for public review and comment. And before any of these changes would go into effect, so a public hearing sponsored by you, the Planning Commission, you'll make a recommendation to the City Council, and then the City Council will take final action. So at this point, unless there's something more that you wanted to discuss, we would just insert that line item, making it clear that commercial hemp production, even though the state licensed it, it would not be permitted in the city. And we would take that forward as part of the changes distributed for public review and comment.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on this?
I do.
Go ahead.
Notice that under light industrial, we still have a question mark there in the documents he provided us. And that's something I find would be appropriate, provided it solves the call for service.
And that's an error. If you see a question mark there, that's an error. It should be an X.
Okay.
Yeah, I see. If you open up the link, it has a question mark, but in the actual original document, it on DocSign, or sorry, it's actually got an X on it. But inside the document, it does have a question mark.
And it would be carried forward with an X, clearly prohibited.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, Mr. Dorn, feel free to continue.
Then the next item is RV parks or recreational vehicle parks, which would also include campers, trailers, tiny houses, and tents. And we had provided a draft last meeting that was kind of a hybrid that included some features from the city of Pasco and the city of Milton Freewater. Some of you had a chance to study this, some did not, but we had a chance to discuss it at the meeting. As you may recall, some cities have adopted some maximum stay requirements in RV parks, like 180 days or 90 days or 30 days. What I'm seeing more recently is cities are moving away from imposing some kind of limitation. I think in part in recognition that living in an RV for some people is a cost-effective option, and have left it to the individuals to decide how long they want to stay in a park, as opposed to, you know, impose some standard. So that's one item that you would see that perhaps is different between communities. It might be a reflection more of how old their regulations are. You'll also note that in some cities, they go into great detail, identifying the size of the space and the configuration of it. And in other cases, communities don't go into a degree of detail and let the park owner and the marketplace set a lot of those things. They do put limits on the number of units and the like. So that's something where that might distinguish codes between communities. And another factor that might distinguish codes is that in some communities, for instance, they say no accessory buildings, no storage buildings, no covers over the RV or covered porches or whatever. And other communities are much more flexible in that regard. So those are some of the features. What we've offered you was for your review and comment, and certainly would expect that you might have some comments or further direction, and we can certainly modify this based on your discussions in any direction that you provide.
Any comments?
I have a comment.
All right.
So I do believe that we should impose a limit, perhaps 180 days. And part of that, I know it's hard to enforce, But I'm just sort of thinking if there's issues that come up where it, we end up with enforcement issues, then that gives the city an avenue to kind of look and see if a resident has been there more than 6 months, and maybe have an avenue to resolve whatever issue there is. And part of what I'm thinking is, as you end up with a park, and if people end up making their residence there long term, you could end up having then issues, perhaps, of the place starting to be run down, or some of the units being run down, etc. So that's kind of what I was thinking, that it might be a good thing to have some limit imposed.
So I have a question to follow up on that, Greg. Have you, in your experience, found like what was just mentioned about these parks getting to be run down and yucky? Is there maybe a different way of saying, let's not do a time frame, but we have to have a cleanliness order or something,
Yes, that can be a condition of the park approval. And what some communities have done is they either require a renewal of their permit, or better yet, they tie it to the business license if they require a business license. And so it would be similar instances where a bed and breakfast or a vacation rental or something, if you have a problem, you can always then suspend or threaten to suspend or revoke the business license, which then keeps the pressure on the park owner to maintain it to certain standards. So that might be an alternative way to address concerns about how well it's maintained.
Commissioner Reiswig has a question.
Yeah, I noticed, and I think it's a good idea. It talks about screening on 3 sides, or all the sides of the parcel. One of the things that 4th of July really highlighted for me is the fact that arborvitae and yews and a couple other plants they do a great job of screening, but they really, in my opinion, need to be at least 20, 25 feet away from structures, and especially away from RVs. We had a couple structure fires on the 4th that would not have been structure fires if it wasn't for the fact that they were arborvitae very, very close to the structures. Is there a way that we can make sure something like that doesn't happen?
Yes, there is let's see, there is what does it say? That would just be a matter of increasing the setback from the perimeter landscaping. And I'm trying to see what we have in there as a distance now, but to use your example, we would just say that the setback shall be 20 feet from required landscaping or something of that nature. That would make a larger open space area, certainly around the perimeter, if you had screening plus a setback from the screening.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to, sacrifice square footage if they chose to use a fence or something else that was not so extremely flammable as some of the plantings that people use.
Okay.
Do you guys all think that that's a good alternative to time limits, or do we still think time limits is a more important thing?
I'd like to add a couple things. I'm having trouble finding my raise hand feature, so I'll just wave it. So Country Estates has, I believe, 4 stalls. that that rent for long term. It's down next to the highway. They will rent for longer than 30 days. There's no restrictions. It's up to the park managers to determine whether or not their tenants are in compliance with any standards they have in place. I drove through the park that's off of Dallas Military this weekend, and it's very evident in there that there are a number of long-term residents that live in that park. They don't allow any sort of built structures, no covered patios other than the awning that might, extend out from the units. Personally, we had a finance director for the city of College Place that actually lived in that park. And my recollection was that the park itself had a standard for how old the units could be in the park for long-term residents. I don't think they applied that to their, weekend visitors, but it was any long-term residents had to have a model that was a late model or something. So I would encourage the commission to put the onus onto the park managers and the owners, as for obvious reasons. I think they're going to want to have a good product that's clean and safe for their weekend visitors. The other thing too is that the way our code enforcement is set up, our code enforcement officer has the authority to enforce the zoning code. So any zoning violations, we can send him in to deal with. So we have an officer at our disposal to deal with things that are deemed a nuisance, in addition to maybe a tenant that may be the nuisance himself. So the comment about the arborvitae, that's duly noted. Although I will mention that we don't have arborvitae fires except on the 4th of July weekends. Or
actually, we had one a week prior that was probably the kids playing with matches.
Yeah, they are terrible. We constantly, we do encourage people to plant them as far away from the house, but even the ones that are planted far away, the fires that we had, I think I wouldn't have guessed that they would have caused the structures to catch on fire, but they certainly did. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. Keep it simple, allow the owners to, do their own enforcement.
So to me, keep it simple is good, but at the same time, I think if we want to maintain a certain character for the community, then then we need to probably have a bunch of criteria or things that we want the park then to do and to meet.
Well, there are a number of, the standards that in the draft that before you tonight, there are a significant amount of improvements that a park developer would have to put in my opinion.
Anybody else have any comments? Okay, we're not actually being asked to do anything specifically here, so I think we'll just move on then. Is that what you want, John?
Unless there's some items that you'd like us to bring back, we can certainly, for instance, add provisions about a business license and maybe some language to increase kind of the owner's accountability to do the things that are in item 14. For instance, so we can add some things in that regard, and we could add some language about separation from landscaping as a public safety measure as two particular items, if you'd like to see language like that at your next meeting.
I personally don't have a burning desire to tell them they can't plant bushes, but I do see a point. But I kind of like John's idea better. I think we let them do their own thing. My only deal is personally is we don't want them to become dumps. Even if they're all long term, the last thing you want to do is have it be a dump and look real ugly, because technically RVs are supposed to be short term, and if they're going to be long term, they better be a nice looking rig. That's my opinion.
Well, that's my concern too, because I have been in communities where they have some of these, I guess, permanent RV campsites that are not very attractive, and I also, again, I don't know what their experience is with as far as other issues that then come from those sites. If there's, I'd be interested to know from other cities that might have some of these that have been there long term, if it generates additional issues for the city, like crime or other things.
I do know of one in Waitsburg, about a block off of Main Street on the highway going west. And the very, very first one is about a 40-year-old Class A motorhome. And it's not a very nice looking structure. And I would be surprised if that thing even ran. I wouldn't be surprised it couldn't even its own spot. And that's probably what I wouldn't want that to continue on.
Commissioner Roth has a question.
I just wanted to comment briefly in response to what Greg's put together here in collaboration with the city. I think.
What's that?
Can you hear me all right? I think I'm live. I just wanted to express my support for the proposed policy as written. I think it strikes the right balance between providing some useful guidelines, but not being too prescriptive. And I'm also would support not placing a time limit and leaving it up to the parks to maintain a good appearance and quality environment.
Greg, could we have a statement in 14 that the units need to be well maintained and licensed? I don't know, something that would, it's very subjective, I think, when you start getting into evaluating, at least from a public standpoint, telling somebody that their home essentially is not up to the standard of the city and they need to find another place to live. I think that puts us in an awkward position. I would much rather, and I think it's probably the norm, that you rely upon the owners of these developments to set their own standard, because they're not subject to the same scrutiny that we are. Do you have any thoughts on that, Greg?
I think you're right. It's difficult. I mean, we can maybe put some language in there, and it may be somewhat difficult to enforce, but at least it would be kind of a direction or statement of expectation. And I can check with some other cities to see if they found a way to address that issue. But it's the same kind of thing with homes. You can have a neighborhood with, well-maintained and beautiful homes, and then, somebody doesn't mow their yard, or their house needs painting, or kind of the neighborhood norm that nobody waters their lawn in the summer, and so everybody's yards looks horrible in the summer, but that's kind of what everybody does. So it is a little bit difficult to enforce, but that doesn't mean we can't. I think the planning commission has expressed a legitimate concern, and we'll see if we can't find some ways to address that.
I think I agree with John on the fact that if it's a moving type of a vehicle, if it's an RV or even a mini home or whatever, they're supposed to be movable. So that means they have to be licensed. And if they're not currently licensed, that's a big issue. And just the fact of it being movable, I think, is a bit, doesn't have to move, but if the thing's broken down and fallen down all over the place and it can no longer move, then it's no longer an RV.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a movable. I wonder if we can prohibit like the removal of axles or wheel, tires, that's things of that nature too.
That I know you can do.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. So we'll work on, language that, clearly, they have to maintain their mobile status and be licensed. And we'll see if we can find any further language or examples from other cities to help address some of the maintenance and appearance issues. Certainly with respect to any health code issues, but we'll do some more research on that.
One last thing, kind of going back to the arborvitae, in the landscaping section, I think we could discourage the use of arborvitae. We probably would need to get kind of technical because somebody, there's probably a bunch of varieties out there, but I tend to lean away from prohibiting any sort of certain types of plants. Our landscaping code encourages the use of native species, but sage is native to our area too, and it burns rather quickly as well. So I mean, just because it's native doesn't necessarily mean that it's not flammable. So I think keeping a good distance from the units, and keeping, I can't remember, Greg, did you have a square footage requirement per unit, or?
There's nothing with respect to the size of the unit itself, no.
So we're not requiring like it to be 800 square feet or whatever
No.
Okay, just separation between the two and
Yeah.
the units.
Yeah. And we can add language that about the on the screening, that if it is that if the screening and landscaping includes, well, a wordsmith, but something like, vegetation susceptible to fire or burning, such as arborvitae, that an additional X feet of separation or setback will be required. And that will probably serve to discourage that. Probably see more fences and walls for screening than you will plants.
Certainly, RV parks, or the ones that that have more landscaping generally tend to be a little bit more upscale. And so if you have trees scattered throughout and you know, more space in between the units and separation, I think that will lend itself to be, in the long run, better for our community than getting into the nitty gritty of, you know, the number of dents on a trailer, or, you know, how old it is. So maybe taking a little bit closer look at you know, the standards, the landscaping standards, and making sure that we're going to end up with, you know, a good quality development if we get one,
Sure.
but not too overburdensome that we get overlooked as well.
Yep. So, yep, it's the, you know, I'm trying to remember my nursery rhymes. It's is it the three bears, not too big, not too small, but just right. So the kind of the Roth principle of finding the right balance. So, okay, we'll play around with that and bring something back.
Okay, is there any other comments or questions?
So I have another comment, and that was in regards to open space requirements. I didn't see anything. And I was just wondering, especially if we're going to make it to where people might end up living there for a long time, that they should have a certain percent or something of an area, basically like a yard that kids could play, or that somebody could go walk their dog, or
I think that's a good suggestion.
Hey, Carolyn, do you have the ability to zoom in, to pull up Google and go to the RV park that's off of Dallas Military? It's across from the Hampton. So when I drove through this park, you'll notice on the most of the long-term residents were probably on the west side of the park, and there's significant. I mean, that's a good distance between the units. So as you're aware, the units open on the passenger side, so their yard area basically is, you know, on the south side of the units, the way they're faced for most of them. And then over on the east end, where they don't have paved areas, I think they use that for like their weekenders that don't necessarily need full hookup or tents. There were a couple of people that were tent camping in there. I would encourage you to drive through that if you haven't already. I think it's a pretty well maintained. All of the units, I didn't see any units that were run down in there. And it's most likely it has to do with their own standards. And I could call them and find out if they restrict the units still. But yeah, I'd encourage you to drive through that park. And maybe, I thought, Greg, didn't you look at what Walla Walla's standards were?
We just lost Greg.
Oh.
You know, this thing does show on page 7 all required landscape and common areas be perpetually maintained. So we're already talking about common areas. We just need to designate what a common area means a little bit better, because it really doesn't talk about common areas. It just mentions common areas, but it doesn't describe them.
Yes, yeah. Usually when you require a common area, you would say like 100 square feet per unit or something, and then you would group those square footages into, looking at the Dallas Military one, the big areas where there's green is some sort of common space. You want them to be usable areas so that, and we also, another thing we might want to consider is, depending on the size, you might want to require that there be some sort of recreation area, a little playground or something.
Well, that's what I'm kind of meaning. Let's
Yeah.
define common area and make the common area have an actual definition. We get Greg back yet?
He's here. He's just muted.
Yeah, because there's quite a bit of density in this park here. And if, you know, if there are kids living there, or just visiting, you know, you want to have something for them to do.
Right.
That's
So,
my
yeah.
opinion. I don't know what the rest of you think. Sounds like Commissioner Louderback's on board.
Yeah, and there's good examples out there that we can draw upon, that there has to be, you know, X amount X amount of open space per usable open space per unit in a common area that includes landscaping and things, and we can add language about children's play areas and the like. So we can certainly add that.
Yeah, and it looks like they've got trees probably, you know, scattered, you know, at least in the middle, probably every other driveway.
So,
So, any more comments or thoughts about common areas or anything else about RV park? Okay, let's go on to accessory buildings then.
Okay, and then this is one that we've discussed several times, and it just there's just kinds of different trade-offs involved, and as I recall last week, we were really talking about the notion of, is there a way of allowing larger structures on larger lots without creating some, you know, compensating problem in another direction? So John, I don't know if you want to add anything, or if just go right to commissioner kind of comments and discussion.
No, I mean, this came up, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, so I'll be brief, but it came up with development out on the end of Southwest 12th that were 1 acre lots, and a potential buyer of one of those wanted to know about how big a barn he could build, because he wanted to have, you know, a horse and chickens and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, 600 square feet. And he was like, what? That's ridiculous. And he walked away from it. And, you know, that's unfortunate. The guy had a young family, and it would have been perfect location for him. They wanted to be in College Place, but they wanted to be kind of out in the country. And it was a no deal for him. And I even said, well, wow, I realize that this is a problem, and I will try to reconcile this with the Planning Commission, but I can't guarantee anything. And so Greg and I have kind of, you know, chewed this over, and I think the most equitable way to do it is to give that, keep the primary residence at 35% lot coverage like we always have within the urbanized areas, but give an additional 10% allocated towards your detached structure, your accessory building, whether that be an ADU or just a, you know, garage or shed. And so on a really, really small lot, you know, a 6,000 square foot lot, you could only have a 600 square foot detached structure, and just, it's proportional to the size of your lot. It's simple, it's equitable across the board, I think. So I'll leave it at that and open it up to the commission.
I personally like that. You know, if I have a half acre, you know, which is what, 23,000 square feet, I'm not going to put up a 2,300 square foot barn, but I ought to be allowed to. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
Commissioner Roth has a question.
Yeah, I appreciate the updates, and I've looked through the rest as well. I think generally they are helpful, updates and changes. I did have one question on A11 on page 10 about windows. I'm wondering if Greg, you could just briefly explain the wording and what you intend by A11.
Yep, let me,
Oh, well, if I could jump in here.
Yep.
That's existing in our code. So the strike throughs in this are the only changes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
so but the background on that, when you guys made the recommendation to include that in last year's changes, was to protect well, it says to protect the privacy. So transom windows are generally, they're placed up higher, usually 5 feet or higher above, out of kind of your normal eyesight, maybe 6 feet or higher. And if you want a larger window, like maybe you need an egress window because it's a bedroom or something, then the glass would have to be like a frosted glass or some sort of obscured. So it just eliminates, if it's looking out into a side yard.
Okay. I found the word above to be confusing, but maybe that has a commonly understood meaning when you're applying this code. I think you've explained it well. It just wasn't apparent until you explained it.
Somebody could probably argue over that, but I'd put on my lawyer's hat.
All right. Well, if it's serving the purpose well, then I'm content.
We can look at if there's a better way to describe that.
Thanks, John.
Well, the idea is that I don't build a second story structure that I can look right into my neighbor's bedroom while she's changing. You know, that's the idea. You don't want that to happen. So you make those windows to where you can't look through and out and down and into your neighbor's property or into their house.
Correct.
So. Okay, any other questions?
So I tend to agree or like this idea of this percentage basis. But I do have a question because basically on accessory dwelling units, does that then apply also to accessory dwelling units? Because we could end up with a very large accessory dwelling unit, larger, even much larger than the house, especially if you end up having half an acre lot or an acre lot. So just kind of trying to clarify and understand.
Yeah, and the way it's written, it would allow, on a larger lot, you would allow a larger unit. We do have a provision though, and we kind of clarified it by getting it in the code, that the council approved a reduced capital facility charge for water and sewer if you keep the dwelling unit under 600 square feet. Now that doesn't mean that you couldn't have a 400 square foot garage and then a 600 square foot dwelling unit. You could combine those and still get the reduced capital facility charge. So I think by having that provision in there, unless they really need to have, a 3-bedroom home in their backyard on their 1 acre lot, a person could do that in theory, the way this language is proposed, but we're trying to encourage the affordable units, the affordable ADUs, and keeping that square footage low should help with that. So we're dangling a carrot to keep them smaller.
So I guess I'm just wondering, does that entice perhaps somebody to kind of go around the city's requirements for like a lot subdivision? Obviously, if you have half an acre lot, you could have a partition and have a proper house, I guess, as opposed to an accessory house. Anyway, it's just my own kind of question, idea. Is it desirable or not to just kind of allow that any size? I can see somebody building a big shop in their property, but then once we start getting to a large house, are we just trying to encourage somebody maybe to circumvent another part of our code?
Yeah. Well, we could look into, we probably have the data from when we were doing the research last year. But is there a maximum size of the ADU that you would be, that the commission would like to see? Is it 1,200 square feet? Is it 8 or 9? And we still have that carrot to keep them at 600.
Hey, I want to focus your attention to page 9, number 4. It says accessory buildings, comma, dwelling units, comma, or structures. See, it was always my understanding that we were going to try and keep the dwelling units at a different rate than an accessory building. An accessory, you know, I'm not going to be renting out for people to sleep into my 4-bay shop that's sitting on my 1-acre lot. But the dwelling unit is actually where people live. And I thought we had 2 different standards here. One was a dwelling unit and one was an accessory building. Is that, and it kind of sounds like we've muddied the waters on that too. I agree with Wendell. There needs to be specifics. There's a dwelling unit and there's accessory buildings, and they should be separated. Is that more like what you're thinking, Wendell?
Randall, but yes.
Sorry,
I was
Randall.
just, yeah, I just started thinking that in my life, I've known some shady kind of developers or people who want to get around codes. And I could see somebody that has a large parcel and they want to develop it and they think they can save some money to just say, oh, I'll just build a dwelling unit as opposed to another, you know, subdivide the land and create a new house. So, and you know, I don't know, I guess just for discussion. I mean, to some degree, maybe it's like, oh, no big deal. But at the same time, you know, I guess I don't know what's the best as a government and as a.
The ADU thing is really hard. We've grappled with it quite a bit on just recently because there was a guy that came in that wanted to convert his basement into an ADU, and it's a rancher house up on A Street. It's and the unit was, I mean, I want to say that it was like 2,000 square feet or something like that. And he wasn't doing it because he wanted to rent it out. He's going to live in it and rent out the upstairs. But it is what it is. And to put a cap on it, you know, he would have to, you know, create part of it as a storage area or something, which just didn't make sense with the layout of the basement.
Well,
So,
I'm pretty certain that the county says it this way, that you can have an ADU that is half the size of your primary dwelling unit up to 1,100 feet. 1,100 square feet. So, and that would cap the ADUs on these larger lots at 1,100 square feet. And we don't even have to go that big. You can go 900 if you want. But the idea is that can't be bigger than the house itself. The ADU should not be bigger than the house. So I like their way of doing it. Half the size of the primary dwelling unit or the primary house up to a certain point.
Commissioner Riceburg has been waiting for a while. He has a question.
Okay, sorry.
Actually, one of my questions was answered. I think I actually like the way most of this is written. In certain portions of our town, the size of an accessory dwelling unit is kind of a moot point if they're residential multifamily. We have some larger half-acre, 3/4 and 1-acre lots where some go in without subdividing and put in multiple structures on them of various sizes. But I think this is a pretty clean formula that doesn't have a lot of ambiguity for those who are looking to do any kind of development or building.
Well, it sounds like from a builder's standpoint, the less is more. Any other comments? I think the only comment I have left then is I'd like to see us kind of delve into that accessory buildings compared to dwelling units differences in sizes. I think we need to talk about that a whole lot more. Well,
We
I think it
can-
needs to be specialized, specifically differentiated between the two.
We can put that, you know, that insert that item to make that distinction and make it clear that the that the accessory dwelling has to be smaller than the primary. And then we could just leave it blank to say, you know, that, and, you know, put a placeholder there for the maximum size of the ADU. If you want to give some thought to what that number should be, you know, going into the next meeting, we can put the placeholder there and leave the blank.
So,
Sounds good to me. Go
And
ahead.
Greg, on number 4, on page 9, number 4, you need to add accessory dwelling unit in front of that dwelling unit.
So you're saying make it read accessory buildings, comma, accessory dwelling units, comma?
Yes,
I agree.
because the primary resident, I think you're confusing dwelling unit with primary residence. It just would be clearer. Did we lose Greg?
The screen is black. I can't tell.
Well, I think we're pretty much done, but we do still need to go to Martin Field, right?
Yeah, we lost him. He'll
Was
probably
Greg-
join back up though.
Okay, do we need Greg for the Martin Airfield report?
He's back.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, he should be involved.
all right.
Oh, I was gonna say.
Well, we're gonna move to that unless somebody has an objection to moving. All right, let's
Okay,
hear
I'm
about
back.
Martin Airfield.
I'll try John to talk, but I keep kind of getting dropped off. But I think we have a solution that might shorten this discussion. But especially for those commissioners that have been involved in this for a while, we've gone around and around and around with the county, and the Martin Airfield and the 234 acres around it is in the College Place urban growth area, and the county has designated it for industrial development, and the county has zoned it industrial, which makes the airfield itself a non-conforming use, which is a violation of the Growth Management Act. The city had proposed to the county some language and some ways that Martin Airfield could be protected and to promote compatible land uses around the airfield. But like I said, the zoning that the county has now makes the airfield non-conforming. More recently, the owner of the airfield sold the airfield to a developer who has some local developments, and he has expressed a very strong desire for the property to remain in the urban growth area, but hasn't provided any kind of indication of what his long-range development plans are. So we've got this very confusing situation and not knowing how best to proceed. And we started down a path of wanting to have a discussion about, well, what are the realistic development scenarios about that land that has limited access to city sewer and water, has significant transportation access challenges, a site that has environmentally sensitive areas that right now is encumbered by airport safety zone constraints. You know, what is the realistic development potential? But I think we maybe have a way of sidestepping all of that, which is, since the land is in the city's urban growth area, that the county has put it there, then the question is, you know, how does the city designate it? And I have worked with other cities who have used created their own future land use designation and called it a master planned development as the future land use designation, and said that if the property is to request annexation to the city, the zoning will be set based on a master plan submitted for city review and approval that would go through a public process, or it would go through, or it would be set based on a sub-area plan, which is an addendum to the city's comprehensive plan. So basically what the city would say is, if it's going to be annexed into the city in the future, there's going to have to be some master planning for the site. And based on that master planning, if the master plan is approved by the city, then the zoning would be based on that approved master plan. So that might be the best we can come up with in this period of uncertainty, but it puts the emphasis on there has to be a plan for the development of that area, and it has to be approved by the city, and it has to allow opportunities for public review and comment. So that might be a way of addressing this kind of crazy issue that we have.
So I have a question. What if the current property owner decides that he does not want an airport anymore? Basically, he just wants to have the land to develop into light industrial and just wipe the airport out. Could he do that at this point?
Under the county zoning, he would be able to do that.
And so part of my, so I kind of like your idea of a master plan.
You were breaking up, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say, under the current county zoning, the property owner could shut down the airport. In fact, under the current county zoning, it should be shut down because according to the county, it's a non-conforming use in an industrial zone. And the county could then approve any land use that would be permitted under the county zoning code. The challenge with that may be that the need to annex in order to get access to city services, but it is going to be a very costly, and in some cases perhaps just physically not possible to get city services down there. So it's hard to kind of imagine what the developer has in mind as an alternative to the airfield. But like I say, he's been quite insistent that the property needs to stay in the city limits. And for instance, if he said, I want to build housing there, the county has said that the city doesn't need any more land for housing. The city, of course, disagrees with that, but the county went to court to make that stick. So if the developer, for instance, wants to close the airport and build housing out there, according to the county, there's no need for it. He can't do it.
So it seems to me as though the county has locked this guy's hands and ours at the same time.
Yep.
Well,
And that's why this notion of maybe for this, let the county create the problem, let the county deal with their problem. And the city is clear that, we'll work with the property owner in developing a master plan and making sure it's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, city's development standards, and then if you want to annex into the city based on that, that master plan will guide the process. And what we would do is then bring language back to you at your next meeting that specifically accomplishes that for your further review.
When's the last time we talked to that homeowner or that landowner?
I haven't talked to him in a while, but Mike Rizzatello occasionally has conversations with him, and he's very tight-lipped about his plans. We just don't know. We just don't know at this point.
So my comment was going to be, or is, I think that's a good approach, Greg. However, I guess unfortunately, the city finds itself on the situation that, at least for the county, there's a whole bunch of land there that it's light industrial. So as we move forward, the next opportunity to do another change to our urban boundary, again, it's like, oh, well, we don't need industrial land, which I think we do, but and I don't know, how do we get out of that? Maybe we can't.
Well, I don't know that we have anything to get out of right now. We haven't addressed it in our comprehensive plan, so we have, and I provided you with the memo, the memorandum that was done up by JUB when we were in our application process with the county, trying to justify why this Martin Airfield area does not make sense to leave it in, or at least as light industrial. I mean, you got a $27 million price tag for site improvements out there, and one of our goals in our comprehensive plan is to preserve Martin Airfield. So, if the city were to dump that kind of money into land out there, which is we don't have, for one thing, you would have to use every square inch of that land for light industrial to make that pencil. And even then, it's probably not enough land. There's critical areas, whether it's the creek or steep slopes. There's the airport protection zones. We just Sunday night, I don't know if you heard, we had an airplane crash at takeoff. They were only about 15 or 20 feet in the air. And so there were no injuries or major injuries, but it is an airport and we need to protect the runways. I think putting the onus onto the developer or the owner to apply for a master plan and show us how they're gonna develop the land and what their proposed uses are, and give us an opportunity to weigh in on it.
So Greg, I got one big final question for me is the way things went between us and the county on this whole land use and whatnot anyway, what are the chances that this guy could force us to do something we as a city don't want to do? Is Greg still with us?
You broke. Yeah. You broke up, Ken, but I think I got the gist of it. there is, I mean, not much that it can force the city to do, because he would still have to apply for annexation. And so, you know, they'd have to go through the annexation process, and the I think if I think the county has kind of created a problem for itself, and I wouldn't be surprised that the county comes back at some point to the city and says, we got a problem here and we need to fix this. And we're going to say, no kidding. So I think maybe the county is going to be more likely to be the ones to kind of realize that they stepped in it. But this approach, I think, would position the city well, and it would be, I think it would be a good place for the city to be, and I think the county's going to discover one of these days that they're in a bad place.
Commissioner Rice-Wake has a question.
More of a comment. I believe there's actually 3 different landowners in that entire area. So the developer who bought Martin Field does not own all the property surrounding the airport, as I understand it. So there is some residential there.
Yeah, there's 2 small residential properties, and oh, by the way, the county's zoning and the county's designation makes them non-conforming too. So everybody's non-conforming out there, and so I'm not quite sure where the county is going with this, but they could continue their current uses, but in theory, if the county were, if they were to submit applications to expand any of those uses, in theory, the county should be saying no unless they're violating their own regulations.
Yeah, and some of that's currently agricultural land as well, correct?
Yes.
It's agricultural land, but it's not zoned agricultural land, and it is not. They're not soils of significance. What's the terminology, Greg?
Commercial significance.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is not designated agricultural lands. It's a agricultural use, and the property owners may be getting some tax advantages from that. I'd have to double check that, but it is not protected agricultural lands.
Okay, so basically the city's standpoint is, it sounds sound to me. Does anybody have any other comments about whether they like the proposal, or the direction they're going, or comments or questions?
We would bring the language back to you at the next meeting so you could see it specifically, but it's pretty straightforward, and as I establishes some principles regarding future planning, and then we'd wait to see what the property owner has in mind, or owners have in mind.
Right. All right. Once again, Greg, we appreciate your assistance on this, but we now need to make sure that there's no other business for the good of the order. Does anybody have any new business or different business they'd like to talk about, discuss? Okay, if there's not, I'd like a motion to adjourn, please. Gotta turn your speaker on there, Mr. Olson.
I'd move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All right, we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second. Is there any objections to adjourning? Is there? Okay, then I guess we're adjourned. Thank you, folks. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all. Keep washing your hands.
Hey, Greg, can you give me a call tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, good night. Bye-bye.